From bugging your political enemies in the middle of the night, to secretly recording every conversation in the Oval Office, to becoming the first and only US president to resign in disgrace. This is the Watergate Scandal Explained. An event so crazy, it started with a basic security guard finding something fishy, and ended in the biggest presidential cover-up in American history. But first, we need to go back to 1972, when Richard Milhous Nixon was on top of the world. Cause he signed a treaty with the Soviet Union, was winding down the war in Vietnam, and opened relations with China, something no president had done in over 2 decades. As a result, Nixon's approval rating was sky high. He was cruising toward what everyone expected to be one of the biggest re-election landslides in American history. What could possibly go wrong? Well, here's the thing you need to know about Richard Nixon. The man was paranoid. Like, clinically, obsessively, keep a list of your enemies paranoid. And I'm not being dramatic. He literally had an enemies list. We're talking journalists, politicians, activists, celebrities. Anyone who ever looked at Nixon the wrong way ended up on that list. And this wasn't just some petty burn book. Nixon's White House used the IRS, the FBI, and the CIA to go after these people. Sir, Barbra Streisand's yapping about you again. Shall we bring her in? The man was the most powerful person on earth, and he was still looking over his shoulder. But at the time, Nixon had a re-election campaign to run, and his team was called the Committee to Re-elect the President. A nickname so perfect, it sounds like a joke. CRP, or as the press loved to call it, Creep. I am not making that up. Creep was the name. And oh boy, did they earn it. Cause Creep wasn't just running a normal campaign. They were running a full-blown espionage operation. We're talking sabotage of Democratic candidates, fake letters designed to destroy campaigns, and, oh yeah, breaking into the homes of Nixon's political opponents to steal information and plant bugs. Which brings us to June 17, 1972, and the most famous building in scandal history, the Watergate Complex. Cause the Watergate was a luxury hotel and office complex in Washington, D.C., a fancy place with curved balconies and Potomac River views. It also happened to be the headquarters of the Democratic National Committee. And at approximately 1 a.m., 5 men in business suits wearing rubber surgical gloves crept through the darkened hallways of the DNC offices on the 6th floor. They carry lockpicks, bugging devices, cameras, and rolls of $100 bills with sequential serial numbers. Their mission? Get dirt on the Democrats. But here's the thing. This wasn't even their first time. They'd actually broken in weeks earlier and successfully planted listening devices. They were just coming back because one of the bugs wasn't working right. But this time, they slipped up. Because Frank Wills, a 24-year-old $80 a week security guard, noticed something odd. A piece of tape over a door latch in the parking garage, keeping it from locking. He peeled it off and kept walking. But when he came back around on his next round, the tape was back. Someone had retaped it. So Frank Wills didn't shrug it off. Instead, he called the police. And within minutes, 3 plainclothes officers arrived. They swept the building floor by floor. And when they reached the 6th floor, the DNC offices, they found 5 men crouched behind desks in the dark. Busted! The 5 burglars were arrested on the spot. And within hours, reporters started asking a very dangerous question. Who sent them? And at first, the White House played it cool. Nixon's press secretary called the break-in a third-rate burglary attempt and said it didn't deserve the White House's attention. Translation? Nothing to see here, folks. Move along. And honestly, for a minute, it worked. Nixon won the 1972 election in a landslide, carrying 49 out of 50 states against Democrat George McGovern, one of the most dominant victories in American history. But 2 young reporters at the Washington Post weren't buying it. Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, 2 two relatively unknown journalists started pulling the thread. They traced the money found on the burglars back to Creep. They connected the break-in to higher and higher officials in the Nixon administration. And they had help from one of the most mysterious sources in journalism history, a secret informant they called Deep Throat. Deep Throat would meet Woodward in a dimly lit parking garage in the middle of the night and drop breadcrumbs that kept the investigation alive. This is like something out of a spy thriller, except this was real, in the nation's capital, and about the sitting president. But his most famous advice? Follow the money. And follow it they did. 'Cause the money trail was damning. Those $100 bills found on the burglars, they were traced to Creep's campaign fund, and the money had been laundered through a Mexican bank account to hide the source. We're talking about $25,000 in campaign donations that were literally washed through another country and handed to guys in rubber gloves breaking into an office at 2 a.m. And the deeper Woodward and Bernstein got, the worse it got. The conspiracy didn't start at the Watergate. It started at 1600 Pennsylvania Ave, the White House. What? Oh, and Deep Throat's real identity? Nobody found out for 33 years. It wasn't until 2005 that Mark Felt, the former associate director of the FBI, revealed that he had been Deep Throat all along. The number 2 man at the FBI had been secretly feeding information to reporters to take down a corrupt president. That is absolutely wild. And inside the White House, the cover-up was in full swing. 'Cause Nixon's inner circle, guys like H.R. Haldeman, John Ehrlichman, and John Mitchell, the Attorney General of the United States, were working overtime to bury the connection. They paid hush money to the burglars, pressured the CIA to shut down the FBI's investigation, destroyed documents, and lied to Congress. But the walls were closing in fast, and the first major crack came from John Dean, Nixon's White House counsel and top legal advisor. Dean had been right in the middle of the cover-up, and as the pressure mounted, he realized something terrifying. Nixon was going to let everyone else take the fall to save himself. So Dean made a choice. He flipped. In June 1973, John Dean sat down before the Senate Watergate Committee, live on national television with tens of millions of Americans watching. He sat at a long table, microphone in front of him, with the whole country holding its breath. And in a calm, measured voice that somehow made it even more devastating, Dean said the words that shook the nation. He told the committee he had warned Nixon that there was a cancer growing on the presidency. And then for hours, he described in devastating detail how the President of the United States had personally participated in the cover-up. The hush money payments, the obstruction, the lies, all of it. And the room was electric. America was glued to the screen. But it was still Dean's word against the president's. Until one of the craziest plot twists in American history. 'Cause during the Senate hearings, a former White House aide named Alexander Butterfield casually revealed something that changed everything. There was a secret recording system in the Oval Office. Nixon, the most paranoid man in Washington, had installed a voice-activated taping system that had been secretly recording every single conversation in the White House since 1971. Every single word. We're talking about roughly 3,700 hours of recordings. The man who was desperately trying to hide what he knew had been recording himself the entire time. That's like robbing a bank and live streaming it with your location turned on. What the heck, man? Suddenly, the entire scandal came down to one thing: the tapes. If Congress could get those recordings, they'd have Nixon exactly where they wanted him. So Nixon faced an impossible choice: hand over the tapes and risk being caught in the cover-up, or refuse to hand them over, look guilty, and provoke a constitutional crisis. Nixon chose option 2 and decided to fight, 'cause he claimed executive privilege. arguing that a president's private conversations were protected and Congress had no right to hear them. But the special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, demanded the tapes. Nixon still refused, so Cox pushed harder. And on October 20th, 1973, Nixon did something so outrageous, it got its own name: the Saturday Night Massacre. 'Cause Nixon realized, this Archibald Cox guy won't get off my case. I need to get him fired. So he ordered his Attorney General to fire Cox. The Attorney General refused and resigned. So Nixon ordered the Deputy Attorney General to do it. He also refused and resigned. Finally, Robert Bork, the Solicitor General, now third in line, carried out the order and fired Cox. In a single night, the President of the United States had decapitated the Justice Department to stop an investigation into himself. And the Saturday Night Massacre was the moment millions of Americans, even some who'd supported Nixon, looked at their televisions and thought, he's hiding something. Congress was furious, public opinion cratered, and the calls for impeachment began to roar. From this point on, Nixon was fighting for survival. And the new special prosecutor, Leon Jaworski, picked up right where Cox left off. And he wasn't backing down either. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court in United States v. Nixon. And on July 24th, 1974, the court ruled 8-0. Unanimous. The president had to hand over the tapes. No exceptions, no executive privilege. Nobody is above the law. And when the tapes were finally released, oh boy, this man got exposed. 'Cause the most devastating recording was from June 23rd, 1972, just 6 days after the break-in. On that tape, Nixon is heard telling Haldeman to use the CIA to block the FBI's Watergate investigation. Nixon wasn't just aware of the cover-up, he was directing it from the beginning. This became known as the smoking gun tape, and it obliterated every defense Nixon had left. Meanwhile, the House Judiciary Committee voted to approve 3 articles of impeachment: obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and contempt of Congress. Nixon's own Republican allies in Congress went to the White House and told him face to face, "You do not have the votes to survive impeachment. It's over, buddy." The most powerful man in the world had run out of moves. So then came August 8th, 1974. And Richard Nixon sat behind the Resolute desk, the same desk where he'd made history with China, managed Cold War crises, and governed the most powerful nation on earth. He sat there to do something no American president had ever done before in history. At 9:01 p.m. Eastern Time, the cameras went live, and an estimated 110 million Americans tuned in. It was the largest television audience in history at that point. Nixon looked into the camera, face drawn and eyes heavy, and said, "I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow." No American president had ever spoken those words before, and none has since. He didn't admit guilt and didn't apologize for what he'd done. He framed it as a sacrifice, saying he no longer had a strong enough political base in Congress to govern effectively. But everyone watching knew the truth. So the next morning, Nixon gave one last rambling, emotional speech to his White House staff in the East Room. His voice cracked, his eyes were red. He talked about his mother, his father, his years of struggle, and some staff members were openly sobbing. Then he walked out of the White House for the last time and crossed the South Lawn to the waiting helicopter with his wife Pat beside him. At the steps of the helicopter, Nixon turned around. He faced the cameras, raised both arms, and spread his fingers into twin V for victory signs. That frozen image of a disgraced president became one of the most iconic photographs in American history. Best of luck in retirement, sir! Try not to be hated too much out there! But 1 month later, the new president, Gerald Ford, granted Nixon a full and unconditional pardon for any crimes he had committed while in office. So Nixon never faced trial and never went to prison. But dozens of his aides and associates did. 69 people were charged and 48 were found guilty, including his attorney general, chief of staff, domestic policy advisor, and White House counsel. The president walked free, and his people paid the price. Dang, I'm glad I wasn't wrapped up in that. Whew, dodged a bullet. 'Cause the Watergate scandal didn't just end a presidency, it fundamentally changed how Americans see their government. Before Watergate, most Americans trusted the president. Polls showed over 70% of Americans had faith in the federal government. But after Watergate, that number plummeted. And in a lot of ways, it never fully came back. In response, Congress passed the War Powers Act and strengthened the Freedom of Information Act. The whole point was to make sure no president could ever abuse power like that again. The word Watergate itself became shorthand for political scandal. Every major scandal since has had "gate" slapped on the end of it. And Frank Wills, the 24-year-old security guard making $80 a week, he never got famous in the way he deserved. He actually struggled financially for years, couldn't find steady work, and died in 2000 at the age of 52, forgotten by the country he helped save. Man, that honestly breaks my heart. But here's the thing, Watergate worked. Not the scandal, but the response. 'Cause a free press investigated when no one else would. Congress, including members of Nixon's own party, did its job. And the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that the law applies to everyone. The system bent, pretty dang hard at that. But it did not break. And although Nixon went down in flames, America and the presidency survived. Man, that was a close one, sir. Oh, and if you're wondering whether any Agent Flappygate scandals are on the horizon, I can assure you I've been on my best behavior. Right, babe? Haha, she loves me. But speaking of difficult presidential moments, this is every US president's darkest day. From watching the White House burn to the ground, to cradling the body of your decapitated son, to having your entire cabinet blown up by a cannon. Some of these are so crazy, they make Watergate look like a parking ticket. So click right here and keep watching.